Christianity and Islam, the two largest religions in the world currently. Around 50% of the world's population are Christian or Muslim, but they both would not exist without Judaism. The interesting question is, where did Judaism come from? Now we know by academic scholarship that Yahweh and Jews' origins. Well, not the Jewish people, that counts kind of racist, but I talk about the religion. The point is, we know that originally it was a polytheistic religion. Yahweh was a minor warrior storm god. It was one of many of the 70 gods. El was the head of the pantheon of the Canaanite religion. Well, the word El was a generic term for whatever head of the pantheon of the region at the time, so it was pretty generic. And there were two different gods that later re-emerged during the monotheistic movement that would come later. We know that Yahweh was originally worshipped at least as far back as the late Bronze Age of the 13th century BCE in Jordan by nomadic peoples. And then over time, those nomadic peoples went to southern Israel, where many early Jews were also nomadic and adopted the Jewish warrior war god. And there are many elements that were adapted because the Canaan religion was a variation of the Sumerian religion. They had their own Garden of Eden, they had their own creation myth, their own national myth, their own flood myth by Ziusudra. Unlike Ziusudra, the flood only lasted like a week, and Ziusudra became god and immortal, so there's that. And many of the elements of Moses' story were borrowed from Sargon of Akkad childhood story and Sneferu's Egyptian wizard when it comes to like the splitting of the ocean, right? Many elements like the relationship between Anil and Shan is similar to Moses and Yahweh and other similar tales. And the idea of Jesus being dead at resurrection, we also see that in the god Baal, which is the same golden cow that people worship before they got slaughtered in the Bible. It was originally the son of Yahweh at one point. And there are many Jewish texts that were heavily influenced by previous Sumerian and to a lesser extent Egyptian texts. Like for example, the Egyptian text in the coffin text in 2000 BC, the lament for Ur 2000 BC is similar to the Book of Lamentations in Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Psalms. The America and the Lord of Arata 2000 BC is similar to the Tower of Babel. The Babylonian theology 1050 BC is similar to the Book of Job. The story of Sinube in 1859 BC is similar to the biblical story of Joseph. The dynasty of Dumu in 1500 BC is similar to the Canaanite god Baal. The Armana letters in 1400 BC shows the early form of Canaanite language before the pre-Jewish period. The Great Hymn of Aten in 1330 BC is the first monotheistic religion that will later influence Judaism, especially in Psalms. The Tale of Two Brothers in 1200 BC is an Egyptian fable that is similar to Joseph and Potiphar's wife. And the instruction Shurupa is the original Ten Commandment, where they have the 6, 7, 8, and 9 commandments. And we also forget that Asherah was God's wife. They also have other elements that we see, like for example, I almost forgot to mention that like the warrior goddess, the goddess of war and sex, Inanna from Mesopotamia, was hinted in the Old Testament as the Queen of Heaven, possibly shared cultural influence and synchronization at the time in Jeremiah chapter 7 verse 18 and Jeremiah chapter 44 verse 15 to 19. The Son of Sun was also hidden about Inanna, and in Ezekiel chapter 8 verse 13 mentioned her husband Dumuzi and a group of women that followed Dumuzi in Jerusalem. And also we know, archaeologically speaking, that everything before King David never happened. So no Exodus, no Abraham, nothing. There was no United Kingdom of Israel. At best, it was just a small tribal kingdom of King David that was easily defeated. And we know that to extent, the Garden of Eden was originally reside in the Tigris, the river Tigris and Euphrates. And at one point in the early history of the polytheistic past of Judaism, it was originally a heaven for people who die in battle, like kings or warriors, etc. The Garden of Eden was originally modeled as a copy the story of Mesopotamian religion, where they have what is called the garden, called Tidmun, is the Garden of Paradise in Mesopotamian mythology, and Timu may have been the inspiration for the Garden of Eden story. We can also notice in the discro of the polytheistic background of the origins of Judaism and Yahweh Samaria warrior storm god worshipped by nomadic peoples in Jordan and later Israel. The influence of Canaan region with the supreme god El-A's wife Asherah and have 70 sons that divided the world, which in the Bible separate into 70 nations mentioned in Genesis 10. And generation of Noah is plain that Yahweh is one of the sons of God and not God himself, son of the Most High. Our clear polytheistic measure there is a myth of death of gods in Psalm 82, which Yahweh is the Most High of the other gods like Zeus, Monotheism, which Professor John Day said, originally these are gods, but as monotheism became absolute, these are demoted to the status of angels. Like for example, the story of Leviathan was the original story, the original model itself on the Sumerian story of Tiamat, and the Babylonian story of creation of the original Genesis, which the Israelites were based on. Elohim, who was the first father of the other gods, and this proto-Jewish god had a wife named Asherah, and Baal was the stern fertility god, was their son, which the early Israelis started to write creation myth started with Genesis 2, not 1. Where Abraham worshipped El Shahadi, the god of the mountain, and Elohim visited Abraham in human form. Jacob writes a letter to heaven and talked to Elohim in a dream, and Jacob made Elohim his primary god, Elohim. It shows us that these fictional characters, Abraham, Jacob, and Isaac, were pagans. The worship of Elohim was replaced to Yahweh in Exodus, but the people were still pagan in Exodus chapter 15 verse 11 and chapter 18 verse 11. And in Exodus chapter 15 verse 3 is established that Yahweh is Israel's war god, calling him a great warrior, which Yahweh's full name is Yahweh Sabaoth, or Yahweh God of the armies. There was a Yahweh movement which still gave birth to Judaism as we know it today, with pre-prophets emerged, Isaiah, Amos, and Hosea, which were basically early followers of Elijah, which are the real founders of Judaism. But Isaiah sees Yahweh as a king, but Amos described his empathy with the poor who suffered to Yahweh, and Hosea saw Yahweh as a jilted husband who still journeyed to his wife Israel. These words impacted Israel till King Joshua was a member of the Yahweh's early movement, and his priests made reform to this religion to destroy idols of other gods, made their own holy texts, and rewrote Israeli history, and made Yahweh the official God of Israel, which was still not monotheism, but instead extreme form monetary polytheism. In fact, it took an additional 200 years to fully become monotheism. In fact, Aristotle, when he was still alive, Judaism was still polytheistic. The prophet Jeremiah believed that Yahweh would use the Babylonian army as his instrument to destroy his own people as a lesson. Like other prophets, he used his emotions, like in Jeremiah chapter 6, verse 11. The second Isaiah officially made monotheism, and all other gods that were ancestor worship were the same God, and write Genesis 1 as a new monotheistic version of creation myth. And this is in 600 BC, where Judaism, Christianity, Islam was basically officially born. We also see examples of the religion in Egypt of Aten, which in hymn Aten is very similar to Psalm 104. The Ugaritic was originally a place only a special few warriors agreed to go after they died, and the concept of sin/fall was a later creation. We can see that early history of Judaism was originally polytheistic, who believed in many gods. Yahweh was a Sumerian warrior storm god, and followed many elements of Sumerian mythology, and to a lesser extent some Egyptian element. Once until after the Babylonian captivity, where interaction with Zoroastrianism fundamentally changed early polytheistic and ancestor worship belief of the Jewish people, although the many of their elements to eventually become monotheistic, although it took almost a millennium to finally achieve that goal. Before that, Yahweh was a warrior storm god, had a wife, had multiple children. One of them is Baal, the famous golden calf in the Bible, who was also died and resurrected like Jesus at one point. Over time, Judaism as we know it was funded by political means, not by religious revelation. I will put links in the description of the scholarship of the origins of Judaism, the origins of Yahweh, and the origins of El.